As always, we'll start with a little prayer of gratitude and then dive into the actual session. Thank you to the source of creation, to the mother of the multiverse, for being this live webinar and for being everything, for being all the beings, all the multifold, infinite diversity of expression in the relative. Particularly, and especially for tonight's webinar, to our ancestors, to the rest of the family of humanity, through all of time, to Earth, thank you to the divinity and everyone present in today's webinar and who will be present at any time in the future, for blessing our webinar with the ability to work together in an integrated fashion, concisely and effectively, powerfully, empowering each person in this group and in this event to utilize and harness the infinite potential of their own healing capabilities, to apply that for the highest good for all life in exquisite alignment with cosmic evolution. Thank you with deepest reverence to the eternal tradition of wisdom. In the years that I've been doing this work, I've noticed that healing for the individual almost always ends up incorporating and including healing for events in the past. And it's become evident that the history of humankind has been riddled with a lot of difficult, challenging situations. As one speaker that I like to listen to says, we've seen a lot of hell in the last 100 years. So it happens that if we look at what's been going on, there's been more creation of suffering than there has been an understanding of how to balance or heal that suffering. I mean, I know there's been a lot of good. At any moment in creation, there's an infinite amount of good and an infinite amount of not so good going at the same time. But the problem is that the situations and circumstances that have come up over the last decades and over the last centuries have left these marks in the memory banks and they've left impressions in the collective consciousness of humanity, which in most cases, unless they're really thoroughly, completely resolved, end up influencing the way we experience life now. And of course, the way we experience life now is going to go forward and influence the way we experience life in the future. So that's why we're setting up for today's session like this, working with our capacity now. It's kind of like an advanced session in energy healing, because so many of you have been with me for quite a while now, of using our energy healing capacity to traverse the field of time and do really in-depth, sensitive healing work for situations and circumstances in the past that still have impact on today's society and even on us individually. So that's what we're going to cover. And one of the reasons I was thinking that it was exciting that we're covering this topic now is because we've got a bit of a setup going on here in Fairfield and in the world. What's one of the biggest, most influential and powerful planets in our solar system is currently moving backwards. into Scorpio, which is a kind of a deep space. That's why we have deep space here. It's kind of a deep space. And what that means is that the influence of that planet is affecting everyone on Earth at the same time. And it's highly supportive. Its movement is highly supportive. It's Saturn, by the way, Saturn moving into Scorpio. It's highly supportive of revealing those hidden truths or the typically unseen levels of reality. When Scorpio comes forward again into Sagittarius, it comes into this expansive state of light, bright, fiery sign of Sagittarius with its dear good friend Guru or Jupiter, its good friend Jupiter. And so at that point, the nature of our thinking and our experience is going to be more progressive and moving forward and creating like that. But right now we have this really special opportunity to go in and explore some very deep, dark, dense, even heavy locations for the sake of bringing the light of our awareness into those locations. And we can do so with the support of a great, big, massive planet like Sagittarius. Oh, excuse me, like Saturn. Excuse me, they both start with S's. Like Saturn. It makes it easy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to go into those places. So it's nice to take advantage of that. And that's going to be happening through this webinar. And I think maybe the next 2 webinars. And those 2 will go even deeper. So today, this webinar will probably be a bit of a setup for the next 2. But we will see when we get to those. Anyway, as for tonight, I wanted to mention that. And then the other thing that's happening locally here in Fairfield is a big gathering of people from all over the nation for a big course where there's like extra meditation, and so there's a kind of an extra silence over the city. And I have 2 family members on that course, so that brings it right into our home. This is really, the silence right now is very luscious. It's very rich and it's very blissful. And so I just wanted to mention that because I feel as if that's one of the influences that makes it possible for us as a collective to move into these deeper spaces in a way which is comfortable and doable. So that said, let's do it. What I'm doing is I'm reconnecting with the integrative element that's in the group of our webinar. And as you know, I'm speaking out every little thing that I'm doing best that I can. So that, and then offering with the group, awareness with the group, what we need to do as a collective in order to get into those deep spaces. And the first thing that I'm experiencing as I'm offering into the silence that intention is really surprising me is a very actually light feeling. And I was thinking, oh, we're going to go into deep spaces. Okay. No, it's a light feeling. It's there's definitely this very sweet, protective, safe, angelic feeling that is activated as a byproduct of our collective intention to move into the areas that need to be healed. And I guess that does make sense. It wasn't what I was expecting, but it makes sense because in order to create the healing effect in those denser areas of collective consciousness, it makes sense that we would bring in the opposite of that density, which is the sweet, very, very uplifting, very light, angelic energy. So that is coming to the foreground of expression for everybody in the group. Thank you all for being angels. You're being angels right now. It's very sweet. And I like the fact that we all get the chance to experience ourselves as angels. We experience, basically what we're experiencing are the laws of nature within our own consciousness, which have the qualities that we associate with angels. So we know that each of us as individuals and each of us as the wholeness of creation is bigger than that, but that we can express it through our physiologies and through our consciousness, just the same way we can express words, right? It's like I'm bigger than my words, but I can say things with my words, and the words become an aspect of the expression of myself. I become known for those things. And it is what I am. And I am bigger than that. So enjoy that feeling, that really rich, light, sweet, supportive, compassionate, lovely, lovely, angelic feeling. Because it's very much who we are. And it's what it's doing, the reason it's coming forth right now at this moment before we dive, is it is restructuring definition of self. It's allowing each of us to restructure ourselves in terms of our own nature, incorporating angelic energies. And I'm seeing it expanding. I'm seeing it expanding into deeper expressions. And I'm understanding, and a download coming in for everybody in the session, that there's a hierarchy in the area of the physiology where these structures reside. And without my usual diagrams in the back, I use my fingers. This area that I've been calling collective level, the physiology, I realized I've been really enjoying discussions with various experts in the field of Vedic science and so forth over the last weeks, and enjoying the fact that the gap between the para or unmanifest level of creation and the manifest level of creation is actually here. These two deepest levels of self we can identify in terms of Vedic sciences, saguna and nirguna. There we go. Nirguna here and saguna here, and saguna is where all the lively, warmed up aspects, animate aspects of being that are infinite in nature reside, and that's where those qualities of self reside. And because these are the manifest levels of self, there's a tendency to not really necessarily identify with the pre-manifest aspects of self. But the time has come to do that, because it actually is very integrative and it helps us expand our own definition of self. Anyway, within the context of this level of being, saguna, but also can be, I've been calling it collective level, but one of my friends said, well, you should just call it the celestial level, because that's where all the celestial beings are. And like I was calling this one celestial. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Well, the names can change, but the truth remains the same, yes? Anyway, at this level, that warmed up level, there are hierarchies. So that's a download coming in. The varieties of hierarchies. And it's interesting, as the download is coming in about the different levels of hierarchies, I'm really seeing within the context of our collective, of our webinar, I'm seeing gathering, I would say a gathering of the different types, varieties, levels, layers, sizes, if you will, although all the being at that level is basically infinite. But I'm particularly seeing a gathering of forms that I would call Davic, that are the smaller structures. I'm very familiar, that I've personally been used to seeing since I was a little girl. I saw these since I was very little, like ever since I was in the crib, really. But I remember seeing them, quite certainly seeing them all the way through my young years before I went through puberty. It's more download coming in. So I'm just going to describe to you as it's coming in, because it's all new. This is also old and new information for me at the same time. And that is that a lot of the trauma and stress that's stuck in the collective consciousness and has been stuck in our world and on our earth in various locations over the centuries has gotten lodged in at an etheric level of the environment. So we have our physical material environment that we're used to with the doors and the windows of the house in certain places, but our homes and our yards and our towns and our streets and our highways and our fields and all the places in our physical material world have etheric realities connected to and associated with them. And it's just as with the physical body, the etheric body feels most of the feelings that the physical body feels. So the etheric body can feel pain or hot or cold, pain or pleasure, hot or cold. And certainly lots of different emotions can lodge at an etheric level, the physiology. And I'm seeing that environment also, and it almost looks like we have an awakening of a sort of, like an army. It looks kind of like an army of values of celestial intelligence that are specifically adept at working with the etheric level of our world. Very beautiful. And it's interesting about this army, these celestial level intelligences, because at the etheric level, and it's like I said, it's always looked like this to me, there are as many darknesses as there are lights. That if we look at the world through our etheric eyes, or we look at it from the etheric perspective, what we see is that our world has sweet spots and sour spots, bitter spots. How many people sometimes see little movements of light or movements of shadow, especially in twilight times or when the lights are a little bit lower. You might see something that looks almost, yeah, right? We got some raised hand there. Got a raised hand. One raised hand anyway. A little like, they go like that. These are these values of the celestial level of creation that I am referring to. And they are definitely adept at working with our etheric world. And they're moving the energy around at the etheric level all the time. Or at least that aspect of self is doing that. But normally it's happening outside the context of conscious mind. It's not like we think, oh, I'm going to move, oh, I see something in my etheric environment, I'm going to change that. I mean, I do I do locational healings and then that kind of thing happens. But most of that work is done very spontaneously, and it's a big world. So it's not like we can be in there like artists, working every little nuance all the time. So this aspect of self-awakening, also asking now, I'm just asking back into the field of our collective and into the field of our earth and our human collective. Where are the auspicious spots to address? So the first auspicious spot, which is coming forward for me, is that I'm seeing is there is within everyone's ancestry. If you go back, you get like a kind of a divergence of ancestors. If you come forward, you get a unification. Oh, this one met that one, and then they came together, and then they had offspring which met another one, and they came together, and they had, and so forth. But if you go back, what happens is we can go back to times when people whose offspring eventually met up with each other and fell in love and created more offspring were at odds with each other. That kind of Romeo and Juliet type of storyline. And that happened a lot. In fact, if we go back far enough in history, and certainly Western history, we see that there are times when almost everybody was a farmer, basically, after the advent of agriculture, that most people were farmers in some form or another. And in those early civilizations, what's been found is about 1 in every 10 people seem to have left their body in some violent form or another. So I'm thinking that there probably was a lot of squabbling over land. Anyway, it didn't stop the offspring from finding a way to unify. But what it means is the family, that people who thought of themselves as individuals became family. Now, this is bringing me to a point which I really wanted to address for our collective today, a healing for everybody. And this comes out of one of the people on tonight's webinar, I think he's here, anyway, sent me a link to a wonderful TED Talk, which I'd seen previously, but it was just a marvelous TED Talk of this lovely woman named Jill Boltz, who was a neuroscientist and had a stroke and recovered, completely from her stroke, and then was able to describe the process of having a stroke from both an objective and a subjective perspective. It was just a wonderful TED Talk. And I had a real big aha experience when I was listening to it this time, because as she described in detail, what happened was she got a division between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of her brain, in that she was either experiencing herself as full left hemisphere or she was experiencing herself as full right hemisphere. But during the time of the stroke, these two sides weren't integrated with each other. So when we're talking about families coming together and someone over here feels separate, he's going to kill that guy over there for his land or something, there's a really distinct element of separation, right? And so she was experiencing that in her own brain. And what I found really fascinating about it is that we who are interested and spiritual and aware and focused on the expansion of our consciousness and the awakening that's taking place on Earth right now, we identify all the qualities of perception that she experienced with her right brain. Okay, those of you who are left-handed, you have to think about this backwards, right? But with her right brain, all the qualities that we tend to associate with awakening. So that means a feeling of complete unification with the whole creation, no boundaries in space and time, being very present in the present moment, bliss, just feeling light and floaty and full of just sweetness and bliss, and she felt like without any stresses at all. She felt completely like liberated. She felt liberated when she was on the right side of when her right hemisphere was in full tilt. And then she'd come back to the left hemisphere and she was like, oh, I need to be at work. And, I've got all of a sudden linear time experience and identification of self as separate from everything else. And, all the qualities that we tend to identify with the sort of average state of the human experience. So often when people have an awakening experience, they'll say afterwards, oh, I feel like actually I've had this experience all along. It's always been with me. And that kind of makes sense if you realize that when the right hemisphere is functioning at its full value, or we could say the awareness or consciousness is fully seated in the right hemisphere, that's the experience. So what that brings to us is a very interesting concept, that the part of the brain, and it's a really rather small part of the brain, that connects the right and left hemispheres by proportionally. If you look at the right and left, and then you look at the corpus callosum, the part that connects. And I feel that the corpus callosum, but also there are other small areas like the brain stem, and there are other areas of the brain that are also kind of in that center area, that central portion, deep down at the base portion, the substantia nigra, for example, and even the pineal gland, which is a single unit there. Also, pituitary sits as a single unit inside the brain. All these structures in the brain are responsible for the integration between these two distinct and yet absolutely necessary levels of experience. So this is a healing for the midbrain. And what I'm seeing is, it looks like loops. It looks like loops of consciousness cycling around on themselves. And they're at a very, very deep level. They're down at the collective and celestial levels of the physiology. They're before these loops occur, before anything manifests. They are, you could say, the seeds of manifestation. I think the American First Nations people refer to them as the hoops. They refer to the hoop of life, loops or hoops of consciousness. And the ancient Vedic tradition talks about mandalas, and the mandalas are structured with loops within loops within loops within loops. And so this structure I'm seeing, and it's presenting in a very orderly and practical way into the center brain area. I'm seeing locations in our universe which are associated with extremely high levels of order, like extremely, extremely high levels of integration, where these loops within loops within loops, and they go to infinity. Okay, so the loops that go to infinitely small loops and infinitely big loops, but they're locations in our universe where they are able to express themselves in a broader capacity than they normally express themselves within the context of a human brain. And this perspective of these loops within loops being larger and broader and more profound than what we as humans are normally accustomed to experiencing is imprinting as a download on our beings. It's expanding the capacity of the inner brain to function in an orderly and efficient manner. It is upgrading our ability to integrate the two hemispheres of the brain in such a way as to experience both the liberation of unbounded awareness and the power of applying that unbounded, infinite creativity, intelligence, and capacity to the material field of creation. And I just felt a big sort of whooshing of energy running particularly through, for those of you who are right-handed, particularly through the inner portion of the left brain. Is a restructuring right in there, in what they call the white brain matter, I think. It's kind of like the inner part of the cerebral cortex. And as that happened, it seems that it released some boundaries or limitations in the left side of the brain. These boundaries and limitations normally, in my experience, have been associated with belief systems which are limiting. But in this case, the movement was so fast and so kind of thorough that I wouldn't even say that we released beliefs. It feels more like there was a whole complete package of beliefs plus impressions plus forms of identification plus other subtler materials that were in that area. And it feels like it's still happening, actually, that there is an energy like Shakti, which is a subtle energy. It starts at the base of the spine and tends to move up the spine like that. So that Shakti is warming up through the layers of the torso and is being drawn up into the left hemisphere in order to activate that, to awaken it more thoroughly. So interesting. I wasn't expecting this at all, but I love it and I love you. Thank you for being the ones. Thank you for being the ones who are responsible for such a healing coming forward. As I'm feeling that awakening in the left hemisphere, stretching out to the edges of the brain and starting to integrate in the gray matter, the darker matter at the more outer level of the brain. And it feels as if it's a very, very soft, slightly warm energy flow going into that left side of the brain. It is connected to and associated with very delicate light medicines being produced at this moment in the causal body. This one, the causal body. We've got 8 layers. That warmth, it speaks at a cellular level to the physiology. It's speaking to the cells on the left side of the brain. And one of the things it's doing is it's increasing the capacity of the left side of the brain to experience, it's opening the dopaminergic pathways to experience bliss. Although, even though I see this nice opening of dopaminergic pathways and I see a lot of activation going on the left side of the brain, for those who are left-handed, that would be on the right side of the brain, it doesn't look as if the experience of bliss that's taking place is isolated only to the dopaminergic pathways. It really looks as if the bliss is moving through the entire left side, the entire left hemisphere of the brain. One of the things that's happening is there's a deep restructuring going on, which disallows an individual to be caught in the illusion of fear. That's good. We like that for our ancestors. We like that for everybody in the history of humanity. I think fear has been one of the great motivators and has been one of the great movers in our society for centuries. It's been one of the influences that the administrative bodies in our culture, in our society, have used to control people in groups. If we keep everybody frightened enough, they'll be willing to go along with all sorts of rules and regulations and losses of freedom and so forth. So that's shifting. And I'm watching it shift in our physiologies, and I'm asking, to whatever degree, that quality of expansion, of freedom, and it's really a feeling of bliss, like happiness, basically, is able to extend down to the molecular level of the physiology or extend through time to our own to any previous physiologies that any of us may have inhabited. Not to admit anything, but previous physiologies. It's resonating. That's it. That's it. This is where the energies of self that have angelic nature come forward and create, they echo the movement of energy taking place in the left hemisphere with particular sound frequencies. They're able, that level of one's own innate intelligence is able to translate experience across the different sensory fields. So like synesthesically. So what that means is that this awakening that's taking place in the left side of the brain is being translated into sound. It's being translated into a communication form, which then radiates through the creation. It radiates through the web of life, through time, through space, and communicates an upgrade, a transformation taking place in the human physiology, which supports the ability for these physiologies and these brains to function at a higher level of orderliness, particularly the inner brain area, to function at a level of orderliness high enough that it brings our conscious awareness up to more of a cosmic level of understanding. Beautiful. You are beautiful. You are amazing. I hope you're enjoying that warmth up in the head, behind the ear. One of the things I'm seeing that this warmth is doing is it's like moving the tissues of the brain just ever so delicately, like a sort of electromagnetic energy flow, which is having a purifying effect. It is literally clearing, for some people in this healing session, it's clearing out imbalances that are sitting in the brain area. Oh, this is good. And this is also going to ancestors. Particularly, it turns out, it appears, and I'm just reading this from what's going on, that there are certain kinds of microbial structures that can get into the head area. They can cause infections in the ears. They can cause inflammation in the brain. And to me, they look more fungus-like than virus-like. They look more fungus-like. But all sorts of microbial imbalances are being addressed at this moment. Channels of communication are clearing between the gut and the head. The upgrade taking place in the head is also affecting the gut. For pretty much everybody on this healing session, the microbiome of the intestinal area has been receiving upgrades over many webinar sessions. So in the overall, I would say almost everyone's microbiome is in really beautiful shape. But in the head, because of the blood-brain barrier, there's been a little more of a, it's an area that's been untouched. This is that Saturn influence of being able to go deep and address the areas that have been hidden. The thing about microbes of various types is that, and all beings of all types, is that all beings come from the being, they come from the source of creation, and they manifest to denser levels, right? So we know that some beings manifest to fully dense, fully manifest, and some manifest just to partial levels of density. So a lot of what's taking place in the head right now, particularly on this left side for right-handed people, is a restructuring at an etheric level of the form, the body form. This is very interesting. Again, I'm bowing down to the wisdom of our collective because I'm seeing things that are fascinating to me that I was not expecting. Bless you, bless us all for being able to create this space where we can do this. So it turns out that our ability to understand the orderliness of our etheric environments is based on functions of the left brain. that because the right brain functioning doesn't see separation, it doesn't see boundaries, it doesn't see limitations. It is the responsibility of the left side of the brain to make sense out of the subtler levels of creation, subtler levels of our world, levels that are still manifest, like at the etheric level. So here's the etheric level here, right? So it's in the manifest level of creation, and yet it's not fully physical. And for a lot of us, and particularly for the healings that we need to do for our beautiful earth and our beautiful family of humanity, we need to be very adept at working with the etheric level of our environment, because that's where stuff hides. And this upgrade to the left side of the brain supports our ability to literally make sense of the input, the subtle input from the etheric level of our world. So that we had a hand up for sometimes seeing those movements of lights and shadows around in the environment, but now for everybody, being able to actually identify and recognize and honor those structures, make sense of them. As we make sense of them and are capable of articulating what we see, we are also necessarily uplifted to a point where we can start to design or structure. We use our intelligence and creativity to create specific qualities of energy in the environment. Now, I know some of you have, I know some of the ladies in this group have these amazing homes, right? Homes where the physical structure of the home is very highly attuned to the energetic frequency in the home. Yeah, I know you have this. So this is I would say like an advanced way of integrating the subtler structures of orderliness in the environment with its actual physical structure, and choosing certain colors for the walls and things like that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And just exact placement of that picture on the wall, just like it can't be even a millimeter one way or the other, and the precise exactly where I'm going to put my big crystal and like that. But the etheric world, we control so much in our own homes, but that level of precision work to be done in places like the railroads, literally the railroads. Now we're going into somewhere dense. We're going into the dense area. So hold on, everyone. Remember, you have your circle of protection. I read in the newspaper last week that once a year, someone puts himself in front of a train in our town, which is only 10,000 people. Once a year it happens. That's the average. And you know, in big cities, in big places, big areas, it's more. And that's been going on for decades. We are not just looking at the railroads themselves. Because I went to the railroad where the most recent event occurred. And what I saw was energy from other railroads I saw stories from the railroads in Germany that carried people to the camps. These channels of communication across our country and across our world, because almost every country has railroads. What we're really looking at is not the railroads themselves, but we're looking at the etheric energy signatures or frequencies that are left with the railroads. And those energy frequencies and signatures are not just in the railroads. They're in many places. But the railroads helped us find, they became like a communication channel opens up, or like a meridian opens up, and it gives you access to a particular location or place. And here we're in a energy place. So I'm just feeling it, and as I'm feeling it, I'm using the algorithm from last time, very gently taking this dense energy. It's very dense. It's like a vortex of pain, basically, that goes. It's almost so, it's got so much energy in it that what we're doing is we're putting the attention, but not like really a lot the attention. We're going just deep enough to look and to get a good clear read on the energy signature. And then we're going to the field of bliss, to the field of the right hemisphere style of functioning. By the way, I'll send a link to that lovely TED Talk by Jill Boltz when we send links to these webinars. Not that the webinars aren't already long enough, but anyway. But the TED Talk's only 20 minutes, and it's just a lovely thing if you haven't already seen it. It's quite famous, though. A lot of people have already seen it. The integrative factor, it is the midbrain that does the work. So that's the actual physical spot in the body. And it's interesting. Oh, this is so interesting. This midbrain area that's responsible for integrating between the concept and the whole experience of boundaries, limitations, separations, apathy, all this sort of denser energy, and the light, bright, expanded, unbounded, liberated experience of reality of the right brain, that central area is very close to the mouth, throat, and neck, right? Because it's like the brain stem. So it's this area back here, and it's close to this area here, which is the chamber of speech. And we know our speech is divine. And we know that it is through our speech, particularly in the Western culture, it is through our speech that we structure heaven on earth. We structure our visions and structure orderliness out of chaos when we articulate that which is experienced at a fine level of creation. When we articulate it with words, we bring order to that chaos. It's a power. Speech is a power. It is a living force. And there's even a living Davic intelligence in the throat and neck area. So we're bowing down to and honoring that, because that is gives expression to what happens in the inner brain area when the integration between the two sides, the two hemispheres of the brain, is at maximum. Then we get the art of speech, logos. And what I'm feeling is a lot of bliss is flowing. A lot of bliss is flowing. It's going into these dense areas that the trains connected us with. We're bringing bliss to those spots, all the spots on all the railroad tracks, all the spots. And in some cases, there are literally, and I didn't know this until this very second, but now I'm seeing it, there are literally railroads on this earth where there isn't a single spot on the railroad that hasn't been the site of a human death. I'm sorry that it is like that, but it is. And so the bliss comes through as a form of integration. That means it's bringing together the emptiness, the vacuum, there's a kind of apathy and like numbness associated with this particular quality of energy that sits in the collective consciousness of humanity back through so many centuries. And it brings the fullness, the integration quality is able to bring the fullness of being to light in that dense, dark area. And I'm just, as that's happening, I'm feeling so much gratitude and so much reverence for Saturn, because I really feel that it is partly like we're kind of riding on in the wake of Saturn's movement right now. And I really appreciate that. Probably for those of you who are more expert than I am on the planets and the transits and all that, there are probably others, you know, Rahu and Ketu and what else is out there that may be also playing into this scenario. But we give our deepest reverence to all of it. And the reverence, what the reverence does so beautiful, right? We talked about this before, is it oils up the joint. It oils up the gap between the manifest levels of creation and the unmanifest levels of creation. So what is it doing? It's really also oiling up the inner brain area. The reverence appeals to your inner brain. How on earth does the inner brain possibly integrate such diverse fields of perception as the perception of the left brain versus the perception of the right brain? It does it through integrative qualities: reverence, gratitude, acceptance, compassion, empathy. So the reverence is humming or vibrating. It's it's experiencing its reality in this deep center area of the brain. And again, the structures of the collective body, which are responsible, those angelic structures, which are, you can think of them as laws of nature, or we can think of them as expressions of orderliness, of our intelligence and creativity, which are able to expand what happens at an individual level of self and integrate it very kind of quickly and efficiently with the whole field of creation. Because what we're doing in this session isn't just something that we're doing for ourselves. We're really doing it on the level of the collective and the whole universe. I'm telling you, at the beginning of this session, all this fine intelligence, beautiful, sweet, light forms of our universe have been coming present and filling up the space, the sacred space that we've created as a collective for our webinar. Question. Oh boy. Anonymous. Saturn is churning a watery emotional area of the cosmos. Do you see that factoring in? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what's happening. Our ability in this, thank you, that's so beautiful. I'm going to read that again because the way the person worded this is just beautiful. Saturn is churning a watery emotional area of the cosmos. Do you see that factoring in? Yes, our ability, excuse me, I've got just something stuck here, hang on. Okay, that's a little better. All right, so yeah, this, when I talked about the railroads leading us to an emotional location, it's like a deep emotional area of the that's held in common with all of humanity. In some ways, we can isolate or identify it. We can first like get at it, so to say, through the door of the railroads, because we know the railroads are wonderful and they've done a lot of great things. Railroads take people here and there, and they take products and materials here and there, and they're marvelous. And 99.9% of the time, the railroads are doing everything. In fact, they're always doing their best. They're always doing their best. However, it is through that door that we come in to access this deep, extremely dense, extremely heavy emotional energy. I'm telling you, I went to the railroad tracks, and I went to the spot where the most recent event occurred. And this happened for our community just like 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, a child put themselves there. And if you looked from the dense level, from the physical level of creation, the tracks looked just like the rest of the tracks. There was nothing different. But energetically, the weight, the emotional weight of that spot was almost unbearable. It was all I could do to maintain the stability, to keep standing up when I was in that space. And it's partly because each one of those spots resonates, like it echoes in a very similar way to other spots in other locations. So the one spot isn't sort of isolated. It's connected to all the other spots that have that same kind of energy. And like I said, they're not all on railroad tracks. There are a lot of different places where people have taken their own lives, for example, or lost their lives in a way which was deeply traumatic. And so this is what we're really working with. We're going into a kind of a deep trauma. It's a trauma that one person experiences, but it creates a kind of a vortex that spreads out and it touches everyone. Unfortunately, the one person who does that thinks nobody will care and nobody knows and nobody cares. And they don't realize that the entire community is deeply touched and deeply moved. So now they know. But the important thing is that now we heal it. And the healing is manifesting forth through these physiologies, through time, through centuries, through across continents. It's a density of emotional grief and self-hatred and apathy and depression, despair that's common to every one of those experiences. So it's a very universal stress, we could call it, universal stress. And as a collective, we are addressing it. We are strong together. We are strong and we are integrated. And integration is the key. Because with the integration, it's possible to slice through the illusion that's associated with that. All that dense energy is a byproduct of illusion. Somehow the individual was overwhelmed by or bought into an illusory belief in the nature of who they are. Illusion, they bought into an illusion of who they are. And that illusion was based on a lack of integration of the inner portion of the brain. The individual had identified somehow, self-identified with an isolated part of self that was on the left, if they were right-handed, on the left side of the brain. And the without that integration, they were unable to extract themselves from that space and get back to the sense of wholeness, integrated wholeness. So we entered that area already established in integrated wholeness. So already well begun is half done. Yeah. Well begun is half done. So entering from that level of integrated wholeness, not just integrated wholeness, but what we are, the angle that we're coming from, the perspective that we're coming from is actually an upgraded level of wholeness, an upgraded level of integration. Like nothing that we've done before, And on Earth, maybe some individuals at some times, I don't know, but what we are creating right now in our collective creates a larger message to the field of all creation through the web of life to everybody. It is only by virtue of our collective function that we're able to address such a deep, dense darkness in the collective. And now I'm feeling the energy moving. And when I feel the energy moving, it harkens back to that dance, that play between the devas and the rakshasas of creations, that churning, that feeling of the field of consciousness churning, that deep, dense darkness that's been such a heavy vortex that anybody who tries to go face it alone feels like the weight is like the weight of Saturn upon them. It's so heavy. And the churning is like a kind of a shaking of consciousness at a very fundamental level of its expression that loosens up all that illusion and those denser energies, all the dense discordant feelings. And sometimes I use the word glyphotic energies to describe discordant feelings that are even thicker and denser and heavier and more overwhelming than the typical discordant feelings. So we've got glyphotic energies that are moving and discordant feelings that are moving. Lots of illusion is moving. Lots of, there seem to be there's stuck energy in those left hemispheres of certain individuals. Now, luckily we're coming in with a sort of a resonation, like living example. We are a living example of it open on the left hemisphere. And so this openness, what happened? We created this healing for ourselves, right? And the left hemisphere opens up. Now we're using it. Now we're having to go in and actually exercise that open condition of the left hemisphere. What it's doing is the open condition of the left hemisphere is coming in direct contact with individuals who have a lot of bound, stuck energy. And I would say in almost all those cases, they've got a kind of microbial setup in the left hemisphere, which is further exacerbating the conditions of being overwhelmed by their own discordant feelings and beliefs of themselves being completely not valuable and so forth. So these physiologies, it's at a microbial level that these physiologies are speaking to those physiologies. The microbiome speaks the eternal language of perception and experience, right? So it knows how to talk to itself. And going into those areas where the microbiome of the brain was so deeply, distressfully imbalanced, we're looking at psychosis. We're looking at suicidal depression. We're looking at some heavy energies here. And these physiologies are stabilizing their condition of a quality of lightness of energy in the left hemisphere, a quality of orderliness. By communicating that orderliness to brains that are especially excessively overtaken by disorder and chaos at that point. It's like sharpening a knife. It's like we're sharpening the capacity to do that. If we can do it in that dense environment, then doesn't matter if you're just like at the grocery store, or wherever else you might go, wherever else you might take your left hemisphere. Take it to the park, swimming, anyone? A walk in the woods. In those places, then it's easy, right? Because the integration, what we're doing is we're basically leveraging density, darkness, negativity. We're leveraging it to actually strengthen ourselves. And as we do it, we are also healing those structures in human consciousness within the collective of the family of humanity. We're healing that at the same time. So we're taking the fact that there's this dense negativity in the collective consciousness and using it to very quickly integrate, stabilize, I'm seeing a kind of like a prioritization, right? It's becoming more efficient. As we know, the nature of the brain is to become more efficient whenever you do something new for the first time. First time you do it, it's a little slower. Next time you're a little faster. Next time you're a little faster because you're creating new dendrites, right? Well, doing this work under like, you could think of it like we're doing it under pressure, actually causes the dendrites to grow faster. Oh, I didn't know that. But I guess it makes sense because as a musician, I discovered years ago that, there's practicing and there's practicing. You can just get your instrument out and kind of wooble around on it a little bit, and like, well, I spent 20 minutes boobling around. Or you can get in there and you can go, okay, we're gonna take this chromatic scale and we're gonna work this chromatic scale. They call it woodshedding. So this is the way of using negativity as a sort of form of woodshedding for our own energy healing transformations, for our own physiologies. What I'm feeling right now is this work that we've done on the left side of the brain is kind of moving toward the back of the brain, and it's moving out and up. So it's starting to integrate into the energy centers, the crown chakra, the ajna chakra, the middle of the head, those areas. And I think this is a very important point, speaking of the ajna chakra, is that it's of that whole middle brain area that's integrative and that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. That ajna chakra is right at the peak. It's like at the top of it. It's sort of like the pinnacle, or the most concentrated, we could say, spot of that integration between left and right. So right up in there, and I'm feeling this, what I'm feeling is a transmission and receiving of energy between the new in orderliness of our brains and all the levels of our own cosmic intelligence. This is very interesting. This restructuring of the brain is supporting the capacity to have what I would call free access, or greater freedom to sort of move around in what we think of as the cosmic archives and the divine realms of creation. There's an old story from the Veda about that, of these yogis, these rishis, these ancient rishis, and they could see the celestial realms, and they wanted to go to the celestial realms, but they weren't sure they'd be accepted, so they kind of like barreled their way in, and all the fine beings of creation, the celestial realms, could smell them. They smelled them out, and they asked them to leave, and they had to go back and do deep meditations and deep purifications before they had access back in. And essentially this work that we're doing is that. It's this energy work is a way of isolating out. What I'm doing with my voice, with my logos, is I'm giving verbal expression. I'm articulating what those rishis, those ancient seers did. There were 3 of them, I think, within their own beings in order to gain free access into the celestial realms. This is going to be highly supportive of our ability to see more clearly the subtle levels of creation and to understand the constituents or components of those big packages of darkness, or anytime a challenge, you have a symptom on the surface of the being, and you need to follow that symptom down to its seed and then unpack the suitcase, unpack the seed in order to promote maximally effective healing on it. So this is also supporting our ability to do that, because it gives us the thing is, the astral body in its more core area of the astral body, not the cord of light, which is the very core, but kind of like what would be the white matter in your brain, basically, right? Because you've got your little central core, and then you've got the gray matter on the outside. Then there's all the white matter that's kind of like in the middle of the two left and right cortices. So it's in that area of the astral body, in that kind of central inner area, that there are these lovely little structures, like maybe I referred to them in the last webinar, I can't remember, like little mirrors, little tiny, tiny, infinitesimally small, and they have a kind of a 3-in-1 structure to them. And there are so many of them, so many uncountable, because the astral body is by nature at one of the levels of the physiology that has infinity integrated. Could be infinite number, I don't know, I haven't tried to count. But what these do is they allow each little reflective, it's like a little transmitter receiver thing, has the ability to reflect the entire universe. So each one reflecting the entire universe from its unique perspective. And each of these unique perspectives taken together as a collective then give us a vision of our whole creation. So this area is also being affected by the orderliness that took place in the physical and etheric levels of the brain. Now the astral level of the physiology is echoing that and supporting these, because they're like little triangles. They have orientation. And so this very, very sophisticated process of orienting these little reflective elements so that they are working as a collective more coherently, and thus allowing reflections, or our capacity to receive or integrate, I would say process the input from the celestial levels of creation, from the fine realms of creation, the para level, before the manifestation. Here's a question. Happy Guru Purnima silence. Are our relatives affected by these brain upgrades to such as siblings, enjoying deep silence these days too? So Guru Purnima is Indian holiday, East Indian holiday, in gratitude of the teacher, and that's actually tomorrow. And I'm really happy that everybody's experiencing the silence. Even this question comes from Austin, Texas, so that's not so close to Fairfield, but it's beautiful that silence is permeating. Thank you for the question. And the answer is, and I'm looking specifically for this person, the answer is Yes, by virtue of the effect of the changes in your brain on the web of life, by virtue of the web of life. So the other individuals in your world, and of course siblings and families, will receive the benefits from any healing work you do first. Right. Yes. Yes. And it's partly because of you that this healing came out. That's why. That's why we worked in this area to a large extent. Yes, everybody receives yes. Thank you for that beautiful question. And speaking of beautiful, you guys, we've come to the end of our webinar already. And everyone's been so amazing. Oh, of course. Of course. It's totally my pleasure. They're saying thank you. Totally, totally my pleasure. So thank you to everyone for being here on tonight's webinar. It wasn't at all what I was expecting, but I'm delighted with what came out. And I feel as if this change is not only huge for each of us. I mean, we're going to be seeing the effects of the work that we did tonight for weeks and months to come. But it integrated and stabilized so quickly because we did it under this condition of going into this very kind of intensely heavy areas, emotional areas of the collective consciousness. So that was a really incredible thing to do. And I love that it came out so clearly. You know, it was beautiful. So anyway, thank you everyone. I love you dearly. And I'm going to close the webinar, but I really appreciate everybody's presence here. And we will come back at it again tomorrow and go into some of the amazing questions that came up from Europe. You know, tomorrow's like the Europe day. I mean, I know there's some Europeans with us here. It's like 3 in the morning in Europe, and they're joining us. Yeah, God bless you. But anyway, the point is that tomorrow we'll take what we've done today as a kind of platform and expand from there into some of the actual possibly events in human history and so that should be interesting. All right. Thank you everyone for being with me. I love you dearly. Good night. Happy silence.